Welcome to the 7th South-South Forum on Sustainability. And we are very happy we have these sessions on Mekong River. And we are discuss how the Mekong region confronts the triple threat. That means the pandemic, economic downturn, and also climate crisis. So we are very happy to co-organize this session with the Center for Social Development Studies and also from Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. And I will pass this to Carl Middleton, please.
Great, thank you very much, Margaret. As I was just introduced, my name is Carl Middleton at Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok. Today we have a quite broad ranging panel. As Margaret introduced, we're addressing the current contemporary challenges in the Mekong region that include the pandemic, the consequences of the economic downturn, but also more broadly, environmental change and the climate crisis. But I also suspect that many other issues that intersect with those will come up in the presentations. I think probably the first thing I should do is thank both Margaret and Lau Kin Chi, who have been instrumental today in making sure that this panel happens. So thank you very much for energetically allowing us to join the 7th South-South Forum. So in particular, we've convened the panelists, and I'll introduce them briefly in a second. Because of their expertise and depth of knowledge and their ongoing high activity in the region, especially in relation to working with communities and with civil society, as well as their experience within academia. And so this panel, we expect to address each of those dynamics, the role of civil society, the role that the state has played, and also the way that communities have been affected by these challenges, but also the way that they've responded as well. So we have just like 2 hours or maybe a little bit longer. So I will move on and introduce the speakers. So today we have 5 speakers for the panel and 1 discussant. I'll introduce them briefly now, and then I think they can introduce themselves a bit more when they speak. So the first speaker that we have is Dr. Walden BELLO, who is a co-founder and senior analyst at Focus on the Global South, and also a professor at State University of New York in Binghamton. The second speaker that we have is Dr. Kanokwan MANOROM, who is an associate professor at the Faculty of Liberal Arts in Ubon Ratchathani University in Thailand. Then we have Dr. Nwet Khine, who is a former journalist and currently a researcher with Paung organization based in Yangon, Myanmar. She's also a postdoctoral researcher who's affiliated with the International Institute of Social Studies in The Hague, and also with CSDS, Center for Social Development Studies here in Bangkok. Then we also have Supawadee PETRAT, also known as Konkrache, who is the director of the Thai Volunteer Service Foundation. And then finally, we have Dr. Naruemon THABCHUMPON, who is an assistant professor in the Faculty of Political Science and also deputy director of the Institute for Asian Studies at Chulalongkorn University, also here in Bangkok. As a discussant, we have Pianporn DEETES, who is the Thailand and Myanmar campaigns director of International Rivers. I think she's probably joining us from Chiang Rai in northern Thailand. Yep. Okay. So for the session, obviously we have speakers who have deep knowledge and experience and a lot to share. We'll ask each speaker to present for around 15 minutes, and then we'll invite Pianporn as the discussant to respond for around 8 to 10 minutes. So with that, can I hand over to the first speaker, who will be Dr. Walden BELLO?
Well, thank you, Margaret and Lau Kin Chi, for inviting me to be part of this process, and thanks, Carl, for hosting this, and hello to my fellow panelists. So I'll go very quickly through my PowerPoint presentation entitled COVID-19 Provides an Opportunity to Break the Global Food Supply Chain. Okay, food has been very much front and center in the COVID-19 story. First of all, hunger is following closely on the heels of the pandemic, especially in the Global South. The United Nations World Food Program says the pandemic will double the number of people experiencing acute food insecurity from 130 million in 2019 to 265 million in 2020. And some say this is an underestimate. Next slide, please. Now, the fragility of the global food supply chain was impressed on us a couple of weeks ago by a joint declaration of the World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, and Food and Agricultural Organization. The three institutions warned that, and I quote, when acting to protect the health and well-being of their citizens, countries should ensure that any trade-related measures do not disrupt the food supply chain, unquote. One particular case appeared to have triggered the agency's concern, the blockade of food exports in Rosario, Argentina. Next slide, please. Now, according to the FAO, and I quote, Rosario in central Argentina is the country's major grain export hub, as well as a major soybean area. And it is the world's largest exporter of soy milk livestock feed. Recently, dozens of municipal governments near Rosario have blocked grain trucks from entering and exiting their towns to slow the spread of the virus. Many are defying the federal government's order to unblock the roads, citing health concerns. Soybeans are therefore not being transported to crushing plants, affecting the country's export of soybean milk for livestock. Similarly, in Brazil, another key exporter of staple commodities, there are reports of logistical hurdles, putting the food supply chains at risk. Internationally, if a major port like Santos in Brazil or Rosario in Argentina shuts down, it could spell disaster for global trade. Next slide, please. Now, the FAO and WTO are certainly right to be worried that disruptions of global and regional supply chains could contribute to the spread of hunger. But what is really disturbing is the absence of any awareness that global and regional supply chains are themselves the problem when it comes to ensuring food security. The 2007-2008 food price crisis should have taught these agencies this sobering lesson, but there is the same uncritical endorsement of the corporate food supply chain, unquote. The chief problem posed by the globalization of the capitalist industrial agriculture is through the creation of a process of production, the dynamics of which was, and I quote, the suppression of particularities of time and place in both agriculture and diets, unquote, as Harriet Friedman puts it. More rapidly and deeply than before, transnational agri-food capitals disconnect production from consumption and relink them through buying and selling. They have created an integrated productive sector of the world economy, and peoples of the third world have been incorporated or marginalized, often both simultaneously as consumers and producers, unquote. Instead, in the case of agriculture, the global food supply chain stretched farther and farther, and local and regional food systems withered even more. The FAO estimates that global agricultural trade more than tripled in value to around $1.6 trillion from 2000 to 2016. More and more local and regional food systems that provide most of domestic production and consumption of food have retreated, so that today, as one study reveals, modern food supply chains dominated by large processing firms and supermarkets, capital intensive, with relatively low labor intensity of operations, constitute roughly 30 to 50% of the food systems in China, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, and 20% of the food systems in Africa and South Asia. The bulk of the evidence is that the gains from so-called high standards agricultural trade, promoted by value chains that impose strict quality controls on local producers, are captured by foreign investors, very large food companies, and developing country elites. Vertical integration and consolidation at the buyer end of export chains are strengthening the bargaining power of large agro-industrial firms and food multinationals, displacing decision-making authority from the farmers to these downstream companies, and expanding the capacity of these companies to extract rents from the chain to the disadvantage of contracted smallholder suppliers in the chains. The smallholder, in short, is being squeezed out at almost every level, from production to finance to meeting sanitary and phytosanitary standards, all of which benefit corporate agriculture with its big buyers, big suppliers, and big middlemen. One well-known liberal research institute sums up the smallholders' plight in this fashion, and I quote, "Increasingly globalized and liberalized agri-food markets are dominated by supermarkets, distributors, processors, and agro-exporters that are introducing and expanding food safety and quality standards that many smallholders are unable to meet. These developments are further shifting the competitive advantage away from smallholder farmers towards large-scale producers. Increasingly, foreign investors are pushing out smallholders even from land ownership. Many land acquisitions, notably in Africa, are really land grabs, says one important report, since, and I quote, "the competition for investment, the weak capacity of states, and the complex implications of titling and clarification of property rights are all factors that have impeded the establishment of robust regulatory frameworks to protect local communities from land grabs," unquote. Case study. In Myanmar, which is considered the last frontier of development in Southeast Asia, the Food and Agriculture Organization teamed up with the Asian Development Bank and the Livelihood and Food Security Trust Fund to draw up an agricultural development plan that, in their own words, focuses on ensuring that, quote, "farmers and agro-enterprises are integrated into effective value chains and are competitive in regional and global markets. This is achieved by facilitating the process of transforming the agricultural sector from a situation where a substantial proportion of farming is carried out primarily for subsistence or for local markets into a sector in which most farming is carried out for profitable commercialization and is connected to the local, national, and international markets." So if the ADB and the FAO have their way, there would be a rapid integration of Myanmar agriculture into the global supply chains to the detriment of smallholders. And as you can see, they're quite frank about expressing what they want Myanmar's agriculture to be. Next slide, please. Now, there are 4 good reasons for promoting self-sufficiency, according to my colleague Jennifer Clapp. 1, when a large proportion of a country's population is at risk of hunger in instances of sudden food shortages due to the vagaries of world markets, as happened in 2007, 2008, it is vital to carefully consider ways to improve domestic food production. 2nd, countries with volatile export earnings can assure their unimpeded access to food by reducing reliance on global food markets through greater domestic food production. Next slide. In fact, the majority of the world's countries do have the resource capacity to be food self-sufficient. But of those countries that have the resource capacity to be food self-sufficient, a number are now net food importers, especially since the WTO was founded in 1995. Many sub-Saharan African countries, for example, were net agricultural exporters in the 60s and 70s, but became net importers of food after the 1980s. Some of those countries that have become reliant on imported food since the 1980s still have the capacity to produce sufficient foodstuffs domestically, including Guinea, Mali, Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. All member countries of ASEAN have the capacity to be self-sufficient. Next slide, please. 4, countries facing the threat of trade disruptions as a result of war, political tensions, or other emergencies, like the current COVID-19 pandemic, may also benefit from greater levels of food self-sufficiency. Most countries consider the ability to ensure food supplies in times of crisis to be a national security issue. And depending on the risk that imports will be cut off due to conflict or political tensions or emergencies, countries may want to invest in their domestic agricultural capacity. Next slide. Now, while in the short term, global supply chains must be kept running to ensure people do not starve, the strategic goal must be to replace them. And some measures can already be taken even as the pandemic is at its height. For instance, In many cities under lockdown, produce from the countryside is available even as the global supply chain stops functioning. But the produce rots and peasants lose money because lockdowns prevent food from entering the city. Or peasants and fishers cannot do productive work even if they observe precautions such as the 2-meter social distance rule because of emergency directives that are not appropriate to the local situation. Now, if under emergency rules, the combined force, appropriate emergency rules, the combined force of peasants and fishers can be unleashed in a safe and cautious manner, much of the current problem of the supply chain for cities can be significantly reduced. In addition, it can help prevent, mitigate any possible future supply shortages, where poor peasants and the landless poor are themselves among the first to suffer and to starve. Now, food sovereignty. Local food production must be, first of all, the key principles of food sovereignty. One, local food production must be delinked from corporate-dominated global supply chains, and each country should strive for food self-sufficiency. That means the country's farmers should produce most of the foods consumed domestically. This is not, it should be stressed, the corporate concept of food security that says that a country can also meet a great part of its food needs through imports. Second slide. Food sovereignty includes food self-sufficiency, but it is more comprehensive. The people should have the right to determine their patterns of food production and consumption, taking into consideration rural and productive diversity, unquote, and not allow those to be subordinated to unregulated international trade. Third slide, please. Localization of food production is good for the climate, since the carbon emissions of localized production on a global scale are much less than that of agriculture based on global supply chains. And fourth, traditional peasant and indigenous agricultural technologies contain a great deal of wisdom and represent the evolution of a largely benign balance between the human community and the biosphere. Thus, the evolution of agrotechnology to meet social needs must take the traditional practices as a starting point rather than regarding them as obsolete. And fifth, a technology supportive of food sovereignty is agroecology, which is marked by recycling nutrients and energy on the farm, rather than introducing external inputs and diversifying plant species and genetic resources over time and space. It has been said that one should never let a good crisis go to waste. The silver lining of the COVID-19 crisis is the opportunity it spells for food sovereignty. In comparison with most other countries in the world, the member countries of ASEAN, owing to their resource base, are well positioned to undergo this transition. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Walden. It's very strange when we're online like this that we cannot applaud, but thank you very much for your presentation. Walden has started the panel off well by highlighting the fragility of the current global food supply chain in the current pandemic context and the consolidation of the food production and distribution system and its corporatization, and then the impacts on smallholder farmers in the region and how it has catalyzed land grabs, and then set an agenda both for promoting food self-sufficiency in ASEAN, but also more broadly for food sovereignty. So for the second presentation, we'll move to focus on Northeast Thailand. I'd like to invite Ajahn Kanokwan MANOROM to present on this topic. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I would like to introduce briefly about myself. I'm now currently working on social impact assessment in La Si Salai Dams area in the northeast region of Thailand. And most of the information I'm talking based on my field work. And also I'm working on poverty, what they call the project called Precisions Poverty Alleviation Projects in Untitled Province, both areas located in the northeast region of Thailand. And also I would like to link between the problems generated by the two dams and also the new normal life of the people caused by COVID. So I would like to put the two things together in order to provide people to understand the life of the people, particularly very poor, the poorer of the poor. They suffer more than the past. before. They already suffer before the COVID, but now COVID just top up, add the suffering more and more. So I just would like to focus on that. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, before that, I would like to talk about the Northeast region first, in order to give people to get a sense what does it mean, what's Northeast regions in terms of geography and socioeconomic conditions. Of course, the Northeast region is the largest region in Thailand and the most populous region in Thailand, and considered as the poorest, the driest, and also the regions considered as the most sensitive in terms of politics in Thailand, because the regions share the border with Laos, Cambodia, and also near Mekong mainstream dams. So a lot of dams upstream, and the dams impacts on the life of the people downstream, and mostly in the Northeast region. And the socioeconomics, main occupations of the people in the Northeast regions, agriculture and fishery, and also forestry-based economy. But because of the scarcity of natural resources due to dams construction, due to deforestation, and also due to a lot of development projects, including urbanizations, those resources been scarce and scary and scarer, and also a lot of people move out of the region to work in Bangkok, and a lot of migrations, a lot of remittance sent back from the children and the young people working in Bangkok back to the region. Next. And then my second topic is about hydropower and irrigation scheme in the Northeast region. You can see the Northeast region, actually this photos not doesn't show a lot of dam, but just my research areas on the tributary of the Mekong. This is the Moon area, and even the Moon area, there are big dams. The first one, Pak Mun Dam, is a well-known or international well-known about the dam, and not far from Pak Mun Dam, there's a Hua Dam somewhere around here, and also Lasi Salai Dam. So there are at least 3 major dams located in 2 provinces in the Northeast, in the low part of the Northeast, in Sisakhet and in Ubon Ratchathani. And over the past like 25 years, I've been studying all 3 dams. So I got a lot of information and known that a lot of people's been impacted by these dams a lot in terms of income loss, in terms of social disruptions, in terms of conflicts inside the community. And those dams make people get more problems in terms of discontinuations of their livelihood. At the same time, the government trying to create a lot of new projects. And the well-known again, we call Khong Chi Moon. They were water diversion projects 30 years ago. And now the property just introduced the new version of the Khong Chi Moon. They call Mekong Loi Chi Moon River Management and Diversion. They use the gravity to take the water from the Mekong and keep in the Loi and the Chi and the Moon's basin. They believe that damming a lot of river would get a lot of water. They install water in the river and also allow local people to get more productivity, agricultural productivity. And they believe that more productivity would get more income. This is the theory. This is the concept that behind why a lot of large projects been existed in the Northeast region. Next. And you can see this is the area that the government assigns over life for the people. So they assign a lot of things, they assign a lot of dams without maybe these things. Of course, they try to get people involved, but in theory, but in practice, not a lot of people involved or express their voice enough in the development projects like this. Next. And I would like to take the case study. So on the right-hand side is the Pak Mun Dam, where I have done the study. And Pak Mun Dam symbolize development and modernization. Pak Mun Dam been put in on the rivers like more than almost 30 years ago. They promised that with this dam and other dams in the northeast, the Isan or the northeast region would be developed, and a lot of people get more income. The quality of life would be better. This is the promise of development in the name of dam projects. But I also now, I just finished my book on post-development in Isan. I assessed over the past 30 years development. I found that the promise of modernization and development in Isan, it doesn't keep their promise. So we found a lot of inequality. We found a lot of people get poorer and poorer, and also the social cohesion is not as the same as anymore, and sustainability is not as expected. So I took the photo as a give me example from the area where I went to the village, like in Untitled province, like 2 days ago. This is the one of the poorest community in the village. So this house, I don't know if we call house or not compared to other houses in the community. They said, don't call me a poor people. I'm not poor. That's what they said. I don't know. We raised the question, what does it mean by poverty? But they said, I don't want to be called a poor. Even I'm poor, because don't stigmatize me. Don't label me as a poor, because I'm working very hard. I would like to get some money to support my family. But even I work all day long, but I don't get enough money to support my family. So this is the thing that's taking place in the area right now after COVID, even before the COVID. Next slide, please. And also, in order to understand the dam construction on hydropower construction in the northeast and on the Mekong mainstream, and also how this impacts on the life of the people. So I try to get the political ecology and precarity approach to understand this. Yeah, the costs and benefits of the dams unequally shared among the groups of the people, and unequal relationship between the people who involved with the dam. The poor have less power compared to the company or compared to the government in order to make a decision to build a dam or to distribute the cost or the benefits of the dam. Next. And so I read the article, which I really like. It's very newly article been released by Teresita and also Jonathan Ricks. They wrote the article on living in an age of precarity in 21st century Asia. So these concepts are very relevant to what I'm doing now. They said the life development or any large-scale projects create a new class, new social class. They call the precarious class. Normally, they name the people in the area. They said, "I'm not poor, but I'm poor because of the government project. I'm poor because of the large-scale development project being introduced, being made by the people. I'm poor because of the government try to promote neoliberal." Things they ask us to grow cash crop, and we spend most of their life to grow like only single crop. But when the price of the crops going down, but we couldn't survive because of we couldn't negotiate with the company or with the middleman. And also many natural resources and land been grabbed by the investor who come to the area, because they know before the government set up the project, the investor already know, so the land is so high value, so they would like to come and get the land, and also the people could not be able to control the lands anymore compared to the past. Next. So this is an example of last Israel's dam affected area. We went to interview this lady. The past before the dam was introduced 30 years ago, she said wetland is my supermarket, and wetlands provided us everything in terms of food, in terms of income, in terms of medicines, in terms of material for housing. But now most of the wetland been flooded by the dam, so I couldn't get income or food enough. our food and income not secure anymore. I have to send my children and relatives who were young to work in Bangkok. So now I rely on remittance sent back by my children. That's what she said. And but when COVID arrived, like a few months ago, her children's unemployed because the factory closed. So remittance that she ever got, but no more remittance sent back to the next slide. Yeah, just keep this slide. She said she couldn't get money from her children anymore because they become unemployed person because of the factories being closed. And even myself, she said, I couldn't sell things in the market because the government announced that we couldn't move out of the community. It's very difficult to take my products to town, or even I got the products from wetland that I couldn't find, maybe something mushroom or the vegetables that I couldn't be able to sell in the market as ever. And also at the same time, I have to take care of my niece and my nephews that my children left behind. And we have to prioritize food first in order to compare to school. So one of my my niece have to drop out from school because we couldn't afford them anymore. We have to save money for food, not for school. And some people in the community couldn't be able to access to online teaching because of the government announced that we need to teach online. But a lot of people were poor, they couldn't get computer, they don't have any computer or technology or internet. So it's hard for us also to reach us to get the relief fund provided by the government because we don't know. You can look at their house. So they're so poor, they even know the news about the relief fund from the government. So a lot of people are just suffering about this. Next. That's the example. You see the house that where we interview, all of them never got relief fund provided by the government because got no technology. They don't use the phone. They don't know anything. Even someone went to their house and said, okay, I would like to help them, to help you to get access to the relief fund. But they said, after they register on behalf of us, they never return. I never got the money. So they've been exploited by the one who know better, by the one who got more technology. Next. Next slide, please. So my conclusion is that COVID pandemic exacerbates existing poverty and precarities that bringing by large dam irrigation scheme in the Northeast region. So this is my conclusion. Thank you very much.
So I think this presentation has spoken well to Walden's bigger picture of the relationship between like the globalization of food chains and the impacts locally. Ajahn Kanokwan also highlighted that there have been promises of modernization in Northeast Thailand since the 60s, but these promises for many have not been kept. And it's led to widening inequality and poverty and weakening social cohesion and changing way of life, often not in a good way. I think Ajahn Kanokwan also framed the presentation around the emergence of the precariat class, but linked it to the to government policies that have produced the precarity, ranging from promoting monoculture cash crops that create risks to the dynamics of land grabbing. Okay, I think that this presentation also will evoke some questions, but we will save these until the end. So I'd like to move on to the third presentation now, which is by Nwet Khine in Yangon. Okay.
Good afternoon from Myanmar. I'm based in Yangon right now. My current research focus on the neoliberal and how the government in Myanmar is promoting the neoliberal ideas in the agrarian economy, and how the civil society are responding to that. And for today, the first part of my presentation, we focus on the how COVID-19 impact on Myanmar economy, and then why the poorest and the most vulnerable are, their conditions are exacerbated by the troubles of the government, the restrictions and procedures. before COVID, to give you some background information about Myanmar, we were governed by the military government for the last I mean, nearly 6 decades, and we started transforming ourselves into democracy. But you know, the transition period has, you know, like some going back and forth. You know, the democratic consolidation is not really smooth as we expected. So since the 2011, you know, we have the semi-civilian government. I would say before COVID-19, Myanmar is not really integrated with the, you know, we hasn't had a substantial level or transboundary connectedness with the rest of the world. So COVID-19 is for us, COVID-19 is the first time or experience of being part of the global crisis, I would say, with such a global scale. In previous global health crisis, like, you know, in Taiwan experience, for example, Malaysia, Singapore, and other countries, you know, you had experienced SARS, MERS, H1N1, etc. And we did not have, I mean, these experience did not come to Myanmar. And also, you know, in 2008, the global financial crisis didn't have impact on Myanmar to some extent, but you know, it's not as the impact was not as big as COVID. So far the COVID-19 impacts appear to be limited because, I mean, in terms of the infection. So this morning we updated all the infection cases, that 337, and so far 6 people died of COVID. We are still wondering why we have less cases than many others in the region. Maybe because of the low testing capacity, or maybe some other reasons. Lots of puzzle for that, and we don't really know why. I mean, if the outbreak is really, I mean, if the impact is serious, our situation is not, I mean, we are not that confident to handle the crisis, because our healthcare system is quite weak. I mean, when you look at the figures, you know, we have only less than 1 ICU bed per every 100,000 people. We have like over 52 million people, nearly 53 million people in the country. But our healthcare spending has been in decline, surprisingly, in the last 2 years. And so our health budget is only 1% of the total Myanmar GDP. So only 0.46 ventilators, I mean, in case of, I mean, the widespread of the disease, you know, we don't really have sufficient numbers of ventilators for the breathing aid. And these machines are unevenly spread across the whole country, because the SAMs or the provincial central level hospitals maybe have they have more numbers of ventilator, but the others don't really have access to that. In terms of, you know, physicians and number of physicians and medical doctors, relatively we have lower numbers of doctors, 61 doctors. 100,000 population. That's compared with Vietnam, Singapore, and Malaysia, we are far less than our neighbors. And again, the people have to pay themselves for the healthcare services. The out-of-pocket payment is quite high in Myanmar, so over 70%. As far as I understand, you know, it used to be over 90% in the last in 2012. So the situation is slightly improved, but you know, like we don't think we can handle a big outbreak of the COVID-19. I mean, we are lucky that we still don't see that kind of massive impact, but still we don't know, you know, what will be the near future, what can we see in the near future. And sorry for I did not show the slide. So the economic impact, the COVID-19 shock has affected the economy key growth engines, a sharp decline in export, especially because the global gas price is decreasing. So we have less income from the gas. And why? And the government sector, the tourism arrival just stopped. because of the constraint of the domestic economic activities. So the economic slowdown we could control the spread of the virus. At the same time, we suffer economically. That's especially in the agriculture sector, you know, the way which comprises a fifth of the economy and over half of the employment were somehow disrupted. The most affected area is the remittances flow. It's dropped to 10%. 10% means this figure show only the official remittances channels. We have, I would say, the unofficial or informal remittances, that the figures could be double, because there are more people, you know, who migrated as undocumented migrants. So internally, 4 out of 5 migrants are employed in the informal sector, I mean domestically. They are also working in sectors, informal sector, you know, with limited access to the social safety net. So they became the most vulnerable, one of the most vulnerable group. I think recovery will depends on the intensity and the duration of the containment measures. So far, the government extended all the containment measures to 31st of this month, July 31st. So, and it also depends on the evolution of external conditions like the economy of Thailand and China, etc., or the neighboring, the changes from the neighboring countries will have impact on Burma opening. So how the government responds to the crisis? The government increased social spending, even though the macro level income having a huge deficit. Particularly on healthcare service is expected to increase, but still, you know, according to the available figures, it is still low compared to other countries. The government also provided the grocery package in the first round in April for the first round to the most vulnerable groups, and also for the second round, cash transfer about like 40 USD per household. So it's quite small actually. And then now, you know, the government departments are starting cash for work programs. Some are in collaboration with the NGOs, and some are separate from the international cooperation and the international collaboration. One of the priorities of the government is to fund the SME, medium and small scale enterprises, mainly in the manufacturing and tourism sectors. There are lots of criticisms about this kind of stimulus package, because the amount of the government budget is quite small, but at the same time, you know, it doesn't really reach to the industries that should be the target for the immediate recovery. Recently, the government announced that they are also prioritizing the agricultural sector, fisheries, and the resilience of the livestock industries. International donors like LIFT and US and EU are also funding to some extent, because, you know, during the COVID time, they have the annual budget, and their annual budget must be spent some way, you know, even though they cannot continue with their usual activities. So a lot of rerouting are happening in the donor landscape. When the pandemic hits the most vulnerable, you know, the rural communities are bearing, you know, the heaviest burden, because we are largely natural resource dependent countries. 1/3 of the populations, about like approximately 16.98 million people, are poor. Poor means, you know, they earn less than like 1,006 checks per day. So according to the World Bank, you know, survey up to the latest survey, so 30% of the Myanmar populations are poor, listed as poor, and around 10% are food poor. So mostly the poor people, 70% of the Myanmar populations lives in rural areas. The poorest 40% and less than 22% of the total income. So it's mean, you know, you can see the inequality figures here. among these 40% who are, the least, those who earn the least are the landless laborers engaged in non-farm business. It means like, they don't have access to land and they don't own land and they are just manual laborers. These stimulus package are, they aimed for the easing, the burden shared by the rural populations, not only the rural, but also the urban population. But there are some fundamental problems that will remain, very challenging for the resilience or embedding resilience of the country, because in Burma, agriculture contribute to the 37% of the country GDP. So it's like it's also employing at least 70 or 80% of the workforce. But recently, as Ajahn Walden has mentioned in his presentation, the government agricultural policy favors the neoliberal approach. All these policies are the brainchild of the previous military government. Some of the ideas initiative under the military government before 2010, but these are placed in the legal framework during the U Thein Sein government, the previous government. But now, they are being under implementation, and we start seeing all the consequences of these policy formulation and implementation. So agricultural policy favors the development of the agro industry. Industry means somehow there are many measures which comes with ignorance to the rights of the small farmers. This is a paragraph I'd like to mention about how the government think and frame this neoliberal the concept. The future of our agri-food sector and agribusiness supply chain will be led by the small farmers. It's only on paper, I would say. And okay, let me continue. More broadly, the private sector. Actually, the priorities is the expansion of the private sector in the agrarian economy. For both Myanmar and foreign, it means like the government paved the way for the expansions of the private sector investment by the Myanmar locals and also by for the foreigners. The government will provide support through the transparent and accountable policies and regulatory frameworks and public investment that ensure core social and physical infrastructure, as well as the quality, safety, efficiency of agro systems and the products that are produced and consumed. I took this paragraph from the white paper, which is called A New Vision for the Myanmar Agricultural Development from Rice Bowl to the Food Basket. So the idea of rice bowl came from the our colonial experience. We used to be, our economy, agrarian economy used to be run by the laissez-faire model under the British. So we used to be connected to the global supply chain at that time. But we also have experience of the disruption by the global scale, global financial crisis of 1930s. We had the farmers' rebellion, out of that experience. So, but now, we are going back to the same experience, and without taking the lessons from our colonial experience, and we are now welcoming a more advanced form of capitalist approach in the agrarian chain. So very often you see in the news, like agro ministry urge more seed production by the private sectors. So all the farmers has been suffering under the socialist government since 1962, and then under the military government. Our farmers never have adequate support from the government. For example, extension services and educate, the agricultural technical input, and also the financial capital, etc., etc. These people are self-reliant in a way. But now, because instead of supporting them, the government is trying to place the private sectors, to control the farmers' right. Especially, it is highlighted in the new seed policy. It's really reject farmer as the knowledge owner, and their intellectual property will soon be controlled by the private investors. according to the space given by the existing legal framework. Normally, you know, the current policy treats farmers as a passive followers of the market, and you know they are, yeah, it's so COVID-19 stimulus package, we're pushing farmers to accept the intervention from the private sector under the new seed laws and new plants priority laws. Let me tell you more about why the seed sector is not favorable for the farmers. We are not certain that the government strategy will ease the suffering of Myanmar farmers, because up to now, our farmers never, I mean, they always had the right to sell and to save, to exchange their seed with their own, you know, with their own management. But now, you know, with the introductions of new law in 2019, now the government plan to phase out this informal farmer managed seed system, because these COVID funding will be partly used for the speeding up of this, you know, the expansion of the private monopoly, especially in the seed sector and other agrarian policies. So national seed policy, which was formulated without any involvement of the farmers, are now heavily influenced in the agenda of the COVID-19, the economic relief plan. At the end of the day, it will put more burden on the farmer, as it increased the reliance of farmer over the external inputs, because it will increase their production costs, and why they are not ready to compete with other in the global supply chain system. In the colonial time, if the farmers are, I mean, if their opportunities were undermined by the external disruption, they could still rely on the environment. You know, they can go to the forest and they can fish. Burma used to be very rich in terms of natural resources, and they have other opportunities to generate their income to feed their families. But now, you know, all these the environment and natural resources has been in decline, and the more and more common resources are under, I mean, occupied by the private sectors, and so the common has been under serious threats. So fisheries sector, since the reduction of 90% of fish in the last 50 years, and now the NLD government start to think to change the approach and to think about more about the sustainability of the fishery sector. But all the advisors, you know, including international financial institutions, when they think about the recovery of the fishery sector, they are still trapped in the group model rather than the being pro-poor. As many people knows, you know, the land ownership law is very notorious case, and it can displace millions. But so far, you know, the civil society has been pushing the government to make necessary changes and to save the vulnerable groups from land dispositions. But still no significant actions to stop the implementation of the law. So far, the result is, you know, 46% of landed households in average, according to the LIT survey in 2020. So the primary, we also have a sharp decline of forests in Myanmar in the last 50 years. The main drivers are land conversions and also roads, building infrastructure, and also the poor governance in mining sectors. And you may heard of the max, you know, killing in the mining sector in last week in the jade mine, and increase of dam building and reservoirs. Between 1990 and 2015, you know, we've seen the forest cover decline, you know, 1.2% every year. So it is the third largest absolute forest loss globally in this period.
Maybe 3 minutes?
Yeah, I almost finished, yeah. So even before COVID and before the agrarian mismanagement, we have seen the climate change risks in Myanmar. So like the average temperature has been increased. The rise of the sea level is also undermining and increase the level of the salination in our data. So it has impacted on the increased migration and to outgoing migration to Yangon. So actually Yangon population has been swelling recently we reached to 8 million in Yangon. So it's representing, nearly like 1.2% of the whole country population in Yangon. So this year, we had the highest temperature in Mekong Region, like 47.5. It's very hot. And this is the peak in the last 52 years. Previous higher records was 10 years ago. So, I mean, in agrarian community, climate change has serious impact, and we have been seeing the consequences of the climate change pattern, and also agrarian, the crop yields, and also the internal migration, because of the people cannot afford to continue their farming in their own region. So the result is 20% of the total population are now internal migrant, according to the Department of Population in 2015. So what I would like to highlight is, COVID relief policy should be sensitive to the needs of the national environmental policy and Myanmar climate change policy and strategy and master plan, which were introduced in 2019. Because we are still relying on the ecosystem services to reduce Myanmar vulnerability to the climate change and natural disaster. We are also prone to all kinds of natural disaster every year. COVID-19 relief plans should be directed to reduce the pain of the poor and avoid the measures to widen the existing gap between the haves and the have-nots. And also fighting corruption is quite important, because without fighting, without having good governance, the loans, taken from all the international financial institutions, finally we end up in somewhere which is not really useful. We also need to avoid, rushing to invite risky investment, which will likely to undermine the rural livelihood and the safety of the environment and the people. This is what I want to present from Myanmar perspective, how we face as a transitional country, how we face the COVID, and why we are more vulnerable, because of our environmental decline and our prolonged mismanagement of the economy. Thank you for your listening and attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Kay. That was really interesting, very comprehensive. I think you addressed all the topics that we were hoping and showed in a historical context why there are current vulnerabilities now. It is remarkable that there isn't that COVID has not spread widely yet in Myanmar, but I think you've emphasized the risks and then also pointed towards like the broader risks that are coming from landlessness and poverty in rural areas and the causes of that as well.
Good. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to share a small experiences. Before my presentation, I would like to show a short video clip about the role of the young generation's response to COVID-19.
ประมาณว่าไทยบ้านเนาะก็จะมองว่าการกลับมาของวัยรุ่นหรือว่าการกลับมาของลูกหลานเนี่ยมันไม่มีงานทำแล้วเหรอหรือว่าไม่มีอะไรให้ทำแล้วเหรอทำไมต้องกลับมาชื่อนิพารัตน์อันแสนนะคะชื่อเล่นนิกกี้ในช่วงที่เกิดวิกฤตอย่างเงี้ยโควิดมันสะท้อนให้เห็นเลยว่าสิ่งที่ลงมือทำอยู่ตรงเนี้ยมันพิสูจน์ให้เห็นแล้วว่า1เราสร้างทั้งอาหารแล้วก็โชคดีหน่อยที่มีผืนแผ่นดินให้เราได้ทำกินแล้วอาศัยความรู้ที่เรียนมาประกอบกับความชอบมันก็เลยเกิดให้เห็นว่าสิ่งที่เรากำลังทำอยู่ตรงนี้เราเดินมาถูกทางแล้วมันคือทางรอดไม่ใช่ทางเลือกโควิดกระทบไหมก็กระทบนะกระทบตรงที่ว่าหนูไม่สามารถที่จะออกไปขายผักหรือว่าอยากจะไปตลาดนัดหรืออะไรอย่างเงี้ยได้ทั้งที่มีออเดอร์เยอะนะพี่งั้นเราต้องพิสูจน์ให้เขาเห็นว่าสิ่งที่เรากลับมาทำเนี่ยเราเลือกที่จะกลับมาทำอาชีพที่พ่อแม่สร้างไว้ก็คืออาชีพเกษตรกรรม เราไม่ต้องไปพึ่งพาปัจจัยภายนอกหรือว่าการพึ่งพาตัวเองให้ได้มากที่สุดเหมือนเรามีอาหารเรามีบ้านเราทำจากไม้ของเราเองหนูพยายามสะท้อนให้เห็นว่าโอเคหนูมีอาหารเนาะที่เกิดจากหนูสร้างมันขึ้นมามีบ้านที่พ่อแม่อนุรักษ์ไม้ไว้ให้แล้วก็ทำแบบง่ายๆเนี่ยมันคือความยั่งยืนเห็นได้ชัดเจนเลยว่าเราไม่ต้องไปแบบไขว่คว้าที่จะต้องการอะไรเลยถ้าเราอยู่ตรงนี้แล้วก็พอใจในสิ่งที่เรามีไม่ว่าเราจะทำอะไรหรือว่าอาชีพอะไรมันก็สามารถสร้างรายได้ให้กับเราได้ทั้งนั้นถ้าเรารักแล้วก็ทำมันอย่างจริงจังพยายามอย่างเต็มที่มันไม่มีอะไรที่ยากจนเราทำไม่ได้หรือว่าง่ายจนเกินไปถ้าเราใช้ความพยายามเชื่อว่าทุกคนทำได้ค่ะเป็นกำลังใจให้กับทุกๆคนให้ผ่านพ้นช่วงวิกฤตโควิดนี้ไปให้ได้ค่ะ
Okay. Actually, this program we call the young people or young generation return to their homeland, and I'm going to share with you about the small practical experiences about the young people engaged on the food sovereignty and also respond to the COVID as well as the climate change. And actually, this program has been starting in 2013. We work together with my organization, Thai Volunteer Service Foundations, and also the university in the north of Thailand in Chiang Mai called Majo University, and also some NGOs. The main idea of starting or initiating of this project that to provide a learning process for the young people who want to go back to their homeland. Before COVID, the reason why the growing number of the young people who want to go back to their homeland, firstly, they want to take care of their parents because their parents getting old, and in the community of in Thailand, if you go there, you will see many old people and less young people, and that's why some of them want to go back to take care of their parents. And then the second, that they want to continue the career of their parents as a farmers, but they want to do different, things than their parent generations. And then the third one, that they feel they burn out from the full-time job in the city. And then after COVID-19, there's a growing number of the young people return to their homeland because of they were laid off by the companies. And this situation is become like serious. And that's why this project is quite important in terms of, it's very clear, show very clear that after the young people went through this learning process, actually we provide this learning process for 1 year. The learning process consists of the several content. For example, we also provide knowledge about the global and local situations, and how is the neoliberalization's impact to farmers. And we also talk about the climate change. And apart from the knowledge, the macro knowledge, we also focus on the skill, because many of them want to become organic farmers. We also provide the skill, how to do organic farmers. And apart from that, it's very important in terms of how to convince building up their inspirations, because before the COVID, when the young people return to their homeland, it's not easy, well accepted by the families and also by the communities. But after the COVID, the situation get a little bit better. And after that, we also provide some study assessment, let them undertaking community study at the beginning stage in order to let them more understand about the situation in the communities and then how they can fit with the communities and what is their roles, because the most important thing is they not only work in their own farm, we expected that they also work for the community development. And we also support young people who join this program to organize several activities with the communities in order to make the communities recognize about their roles and organize study trip, in order to not only for them but also for the families, in order to let the family understandings and support when they go back to their hometown. And also we provide, we found that it's very difficult for one young people to go back to their communities. In the first 2 years, they cannot survive in terms of economically, but they have to work with the network. For the past 3 years, we work with the in the north of Thailand in 8 provinces. And after they have to go through 1 year learning process. And after they finish 1 year learning process, and we found that around 70 of them still practicing the organic farm in the communities. And many of them become communities development workers. And some of them were selected at the head of the communities and play very active roles in the communities. And then in terms of this COVID-19, we survey the 16 communities. And then we found that the community where there are the young people who take the active roles, they are able to assist the people in the communities to access to the support from the government, because one speaker already mentioned about the villagers have little knowledge on the technology. Then the young people also help them to access to the support from the government. And apart from that, they also play active roles to protect the land, to advocate advocacy and campaign at the policy. Like for example, during this COVID-19, actually the government policy or the government could not provide support to the communities, cannot reach the poor people. And that the young people in the community also raise their voices, and they also helping the linkage between the urban and rural by sharing the seed, because that young farmer had been working as an organic farm for 3 years. And after during COVID, they also create the movement for seed sharings. And then not only the seed sharing, they also want to utilize this seed sharing to advocate at the policy making. Like for example, now we have, I'm not so sure whether you heard about CPTPP, that I think it's occurred in ASEAN countries that the government want to sign the agreement. It means that the seed will be the hand of the TNC in the hand of the private company, and very difficult, for the farmers, to preserve their own seed. And this is the young farmer movement also create this kind of connections, not only to support each others, but also to advocate at the policy makings. And then this year we expand this program to the northeast of Thailand in 20 provinces. And then we can see that during the crisis, if we support or promote the role of the young peoples, who want to go back to their hometown, and they become the active members in the communities. And then the way they handle the farm or the way they work in the communities, they also utilize their own skill, their own knowledge, to apply in their work and in their communities. And I think this one of the example that we have been working, and then we hope that we can expand this program, throughout the countries in order to promote the young farmer movement, and not only for their own communities, but also toward the policy change and respond to the need of the farmers, the food sovereignties. Yeah, this is the one of the example that I would like to share. This movement is not only occur in Thailand, but also in Mekong countries like in Laos, in Cambodia, and they also often have the exchange program, and they also connected not across the borders. Yeah, together that become a strong movement. We hope it will become a strong movement in Mekong regions. Yeah.
Great, thank you. That's also really important. As you were talking about making sure that the control of seeds remain with farmers, it made me think of Walden's presentation at the beginning of the risk of not letting a good crisis go to waste, and the possibility that new policies might be put in place that could undermine the control of the seeds remaining with farmers. So the fact that solidarity is built from these types of projects is important, including, as you say, across borders. So we have one more presentation, which is Ajahn Naruemon THABCHUMPON here in Bangkok.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Naruemon THABCHUMPON. I think everyone know me from Arena. And also now I have a new position as a Deputy Director for Research Affairs. And one of the first research that I have to do is on the COVID-19 on the migrant worker. So it's coincident with the South-South, conference, in a sense that is the people from the Mekong country that basically who are the migrant worker working in Thailand and at the border, who also face the problem during the pandemic of the COVID-19, and we do a research. So basically it's not finished yet. So this is partly research. So we will present more when we get more full information. So this is during the lockdown, basically. This is during the lockdown that we have faced and what happened to the migrant worker, and especially people from the Mekong region, and how it's recreate more and more inequality that happen or takes place because of the COVID. So basically, first in terms of the country context, Thailand was the second, I think at that time in ASEAN, who has the highest number of the infected of the COVID-19. And that time the government imposed a state of emergency. So this is the state of emergency was introduced on the 25th March 2020. The reason come out after the outbreak at the boxing stadium, and at that time Thailand have a number something like 1,000, and at that time it even have a high graph that is will be even higher and higher if the government decide not to close or lock down the country. And in the beginning, the government policy is not to lock down. They are worried about the economy and also especially tourism, but due to the outbreak, with the number, with the 1,000 at that time in March, so 25th March, the government state impose a state of emergency nationwide. So basically what happened? The happen is that the state of emergency forced our border to be closed and not allow people to travel. So basically, the freedom of movement has been stopped. So it's forced 10,000 of migrant workers who become jobless. Because when the government decide to control the COVID-19, put the state of emergency, so it's basically stop people to commute, stop the a certain operation, especially service sector to operate, close the shopping mall and close, several factory or shop and other. So basically for the migrant worker, their first effect is that their jobs were lost. It did not use the word layoff, but it's just saying that you will not get paid. And it's no guarantee how long they will lose their job or lose the income. And moreover, the checkpoint across the country has implied with the multiple issue in order for not allow people to travel. So you have to get the fit to fly, you have to get the document for fit to travel. I think even now the checkpoint around the border of Thailand is still closing. So therefore, impact of the emergency decree, state of emergency decree, create the people, the Immigration Bureau saying that at that time, 60,000 migrant workers decide to return home. Basically, Thailand have 2.9 million migrant workers in Thailand, and due to the state of emergency decree, around 60,000 workers, which is the majority from Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos, they are facing the situation that they have to, return home or at least do not have a job. And however, since the border is closed, but people cannot travel, I think that Khine is also in the panel. We will see that people do not have a job, but they cannot travel. So basically, they cannot go to the border. They are stuck maybe in the province that they work or at the border. And in that context, the people, which is at that time Thailand have 2,800,000 migrant workers working in Thailand, and the highest number is in Bangkok. And these people basically are from Mekong Region, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And moreover, along the border, which is such as Mesot, Aranyapatet, meaning Tak Province, Ranong Province, and Nong Khai, or Sakao, and around the area that people use the border pass. At that time, these who have the border pass can travel to Thailand and work in Thailand. There are these people around 50,000 migrant workers who use the border pass to work in Thailand. So we consider that around 3 million people are migrant workers working in Thailand that face the situation of state emergency decree due to the COVID-19. And out of 2,800,000 plus 50,000, at least around 60,000 become jobless due to the situation of the lockdown and close the shop and factory. This is the number of people who are infected by the COVID-19. And this is during, 1 week after the state emergency decree. So basically the government put the people who have to be under state quarantine, and also some people who are infected but no state quarantine. So basically you will see the highest number is in Bangkok. And then it's become lower. So altogether, even though the number is small, which is around 2,900, so basically around 3,000, but at least half of them are in Bangkok. And moreover, in terms of the who are infected, yes, the main population are Thai. In comparison to the migrant worker, except in Songkhla and in Chiang Mai. The reason that we know the situation in Songkhla because they are the people who, illegally crossing the border and has been put in the, immigration detention. So basically, and immigration put them in the state quarantine. So that's why we see the number around 42 migrants. So basically, we can say that due to the situation in the COVID-19, in terms of the health of the COVID-19, the Thai government try to prevent, but they use all measure and is in the expense of the worker, both Thai and also migrant worker. If you look at the number of the migrant worker, for the number of the migrant worker, they are top 10. This is the top 10 province that we have migrant worker working in Thailand. The highest number is in Bangkok. So basically, if we walk on the street in Bangkok, at least 600,000 are migrant. I mean, you should know that. I mean, this is maybe look alike Thai, but basically not Thai. So the highest number of the migrant worker is Bangkok, 600,000. The smaller is the Samut-Sakhon province, which is very well known because comparing to the number of the Thai population may be small. And then Nakhon Pathom, Pathum Thani, Samut Prakan, Nonthaburi, Chonburi, Ratchathani, Chiang Mai, Phuket. So basically, out of 2,800,000, at least nearly 2 million are in these 10 provinces. And they are the one who hardest hit by the policy of the Thai government during the lockdown, during the COVID-19. So that's the problem that they are facing. So what do they face? Basically, what the government worry most is the positive case of the COVID-19. They worry, they copy their perception from Singapore that in the migrant worker camp, you might have the migrant worker who are infected by the COVID-19 or get positive case. So they try to follow by checking, and in terms of those who get the positive case and go to the Thai hospital, basically is around 80 people. So this is 1 week after the emergency decree imposed. So we found out around 80 positive cases of the COVID-19 among the migrant workers, and 54 were Myanmar, 3 were Cambodia, 2 were Laos, and 4 from Vietnam, and 19 were Rohingya. So basically, this is quite very interesting, important that up until now, we don't know what is how many people get positive case from the COVID-19 in terms of the migrant worker, because they still have a problem in terms of not accessing to the COVID PCR test. But the reason that we found this number, because these people get sick and go to the hospital and also go to the active process of the Ministry of Public Health that they send the volunteer to do the test. But it's not, I mean, every migrant worker can get the test. So at the moment, the government is still reluctant to allow the border to reopen because they worry whether the situation will come back in the sense of the second outbreak or not. But what the government do? Basically, the government argues saying that if you are sick or infected with the COVID-19, you get free medical treatment, regardless whether you are Thai or non-Thai. So whether you are documented or undocumented migrant worker, if you are sick and the Thai hospital detect that you get the positive case of the COVID-19, you will get medical treatment right away for free and guaranteed. However, in order to check and get the test, you have to have high fever, more than 39.5, or maybe you already show a certain symptom. But you cannot just go there and ask for the rapid strip test that Chulalongkorn provide or PCR test, unless you go to the state quarantine. So that's why the 80 case come out, because there are people, for instance, the case in Songkhla, in the state quarantine, because people illegally entry. So you are arrested of illegally entry, And since you are arrested of illegally entry, you go to the state quarantine center, then you get the test, and then you know that you got the positive infect of the COVID-19. But those who are walking normally in Bangkok or in the province, nobody know. And if you go to the hospital, they are not allow you to do the test yet. You have to have a certain process. And at the moment, I think it's still not allowed. And this is a problem for the law and policy in terms of governing the migration. And the measure to prevent of the spread of the COVID-19 or prevent the risk of a migrant worker, basically it's come with the expense of the migrant. For instance, they suspend the approval of MOU employment. So in order to avoid more COVID-19, you put the people to be jobless because you delay the approval of the MOU employment because you are not sure whether these people get the test or become free from COVID or not. And that's become an issue. And I think it will have an impact to the Thai economy soon. And they also doing in terms of the screening and also for the do the inspecting and screening for the fishery. I mean, because Thailand has really put effort in order to get out of tier 3 and also IUU, I mean, yellow card. So basically the fishery worker is the highest, I mean, in terms of screening and inspected. So every boat that come to the dock is have to go to the inspecting and screening. So at that time, this group may be able to get the test because they are also go to the process. And they also, the government also have a project with the Ministry of Public Health. It's called Migrant Worker Health Volunteer. So the migrant health volunteer worker, they are the health volunteer who work with the migrant. They themselves also migrant worker. They do the distributing sanitation item to migrant worker community, and also the later at the end, the government relaxing the regulations. So rather than they have to go back to their home country when they don't have a job within 15 days, the government allowed them to stay until November. So from 25 of March until 30 of November, migrant workers still be able to work in Thailand in extension of their work permit and resident. But however, there is no collaboration between government officer or organization. You get extension of work permit, but the immigration police may saying that you don't have the visa. Or the health, the Ministry of Public Health saying that you don't have the health report. So you still have to go through the process anyway, even though they propose with the measure to prevent. But more than the issue of health is the right to work and social protection or social security benefit. So basically, for the migrant worker who come under the MOU, and if their factory put the migrant worker to the social security fund, the migrant worker who get confirmed by the social security fund will be eligible to get compensation and unemployment benefit when the factory is closed due to the COVID-19 mechanism. But they have a problem because some factory did not report to the Social Security Fund. Some factory don't apply with the project, or maybe the factory saying that it's not unemployed, it just temporarily closed. So basically they say that you are leave without pay. So leave without pay doesn't mean jobless. So it's not entitled to the Social Security Fund in terms of the, I mean, unemployment benefit. So this is a debate that the migrant worker facing the problem because they are daily wage worker and they don't get the money because the factory closed or the shop closed. But they cannot ask for the Social Security Fund benefit because they are not yet entitled. So in that case, the problem of delaying and also reducing, that also have a problem in terms of the implementation. Even though the Ministry of Labor saying that we allow you to get longer, you get longer time to stay in Thailand, you get the work permit longer, you should be okay, no problem. But the problem is that the factory itself is closed, and the people have to eat and also have to survive, and it's no any benefit for them to be able to go for the social security benefit and social security fund, and their right to work has been cancelled in that context.
Ajahn, 3 minutes.
Yes, yeah. The second issue is the right to healthcare. So basically, the right to healthcare is that the migrant worker can go use the money from the social security fund with the healthcare. Another one is also doing under the migrant worker fund, but that not cover COVID-19 treatment. So if you are affected by the COVID-19 treatment, this the money, your right to healthcare is not covered with the COVID, and this is a very, high expense. Lastly, my point is that, as I already mentioned, that due to closing of the factory, and these factories are the factory that hire migrant worker, mainly garment, textile, construction, real estate, metal, and plastic manufacture. Basically, in comparison, the factory that work on food processing, either fisheries, seafood processing, and food processing, still work. You don't be laid off, you are still working. But if you are work in the garment, textile, construction, real estate, metal, and plastic, they are temporarily closed. And right now the government just reopened, and I don't know whether this migrant worker is able to go back to work. And basically, if you look at the province that has most is the Bangkok and surrounding Bangkok, such as Samut Sakhon. And the female worker are the most affected because this job require female worker. So the female migrant worker may be the most vulnerable in comparison during the COVID-19 that they are facing. And for them, their most problem is that since there are no regular income, they are not able to afford rent, food, and sanitation. And then basically, if you comparing to the other country, to the country of Mekong region, this is the country of origin, you will see that during the COVID-19 is no remittance from the migrant worker to send home. So they are not able to do that, and they are faced with the problem. Lastly, my last point is that the challenge. Basically, right now, the business take advantage of pandemic. Rather than apply the implement standard for the migrant right, they just decide to be malpractice and lay off them and hope that they can get a new one easily without paying. The migrant worker also have faced with the language. They cannot go to the Thai authority asking for the test, so their right to healthcare or their labor right is also become very serious. The government also very inefficient in order to work for the issue of the migration and dealing with the COVID. So it's very clear that there is no collaboration. And the fourth point is the stigmatization. Rather than looking, if we see that number of people who are affected by the COVID-19 are Thai or tourists who are abroad, but they seem to see that the migrant worker are the person who bring in the COVID-19. This is not true and become the stigmatization. And my last 3 points is that they have the delay for the access to remedy, and also for the issue of the informal sector, that they have the problem that they do not get access to the relief package. And for the immediate time in terms of the situation of their place, and also in terms of the crowd detention, they have the problem with the difficulty in social distancing. You might heard the news that they have the case of the migrant worker, Burmese migrant worker go back to Myanmar and they get the COVID-19. The problem is that these people get infected from the detention, they are not the one who get infected in the beginning, but in the detention is crowded. They get a person from the Arab country who get infected and it spreads to all those who live in the detention. And that's very serious in terms of the Thai law. So my conclusion will be, maybe the first thing, it needs to be more unified policy or at least more collaboration. And maybe the Thai government with Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam may sit together, or maybe as an ASEAN or Mekong country. Because right now, every country start to thinking about reopen the border and reproducing or bring economy back. So in that case, they need to reworking with the issue of migration. They should not put the migrant worker to be on the vulnerable situation. And I'm worried that right now, Thai government seem to decide that since Thai people will be more unemployed, they will not renew the work permit for the migrant worker because they're looking in terms of mathematics. Since Thai are more unemployed, let Thai work and then migrant later, which doesn't work that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ajahn. That was really important research and making visible the serious difficulties that migrant workers are facing in Thailand in this kind of trap between losing jobs, cannot get home due to border controls, cannot access social security benefits. They're in a really difficult situation, and even beforehand they were in a difficult situation in the way that they work in Thailand. Thank you very much, Ajahn. So now we have Pianporn DEETES as the discussant. Khun Pai has a lot of experience on the ground and works on many of the topics that have been discussed across the panel. After Pai's intervention as discussant, we will then open up the panel for questions or comments from others in the group. So please be ready with any questions or comments that you would like to make. Thank you very much. So Pai.
Thank you very much, Ajahn Carl and everybody participants in this afternoon session. I'd like to share the screen of the, so this is the map of the Mekong Basin, and the countries we are talking about consist of around 6 countries. The key points that I catch from the lecturers from this session is that I think the key word is the inequality in the Mekong region in terms of access to natural resources, in terms of access to public services, and participation in public policies. So I'd like to discuss about the inequality as a root of problems in the Mekong sub-region. And I'd like to highlight that the sub-region's existing environmental destruction and social dislocation issue have been intensified during the past 3-4 months because of the COVID-19 crisis. The lockdown, the economic fallout from the pandemic, many people, particularly the informal workers, return to their country, return to their rural areas. And the pandemic also highlights the importance of the natural resources that help provide crucial social safety net for large number of population in the region. So this time of crisis, the forest, rivers, wetlands, nature supermarket provide food and nutrient and alternative source of income for people during this difficult time. But looking at this map, I would say that, yeah, because of the large-scale hydropower projects, dams, and special economic zones, and other large-scale infrastructure projects, makes the wetlands, the rivers, and forests that help sustain the community already under threat. So the fish stock decline, the natural resource decline. So this means the less access to food security for the large number of people who already suffered from the COVID-19 and already suffered from the lockdown. And what I've seen is that the impact of the pandemic has been uneven. This is already discussed in earlier presenters. Marginalized group most affected since their life have already been disturbed by the large-scale infrastructure projects or by some policies or development project of the government in the region. So but I'd like to share the positive note is that we have heard about the stories of
current ethnic people who already harvest their rice from the upland farming and donate and exchange to the communities affected by COVID-19 because of the shutdown of the tourism business in along the Andaman coast, like the Morcan Sea Gypsy communities, for example. So we are seeing that the communities that are more organized can respond to the crisis better than those who are not organized. People living on the Salaween Basin, the current ethnic, they can respond, they can organize their food management and forest management in their area during this time of COVID, for example. So I would say that I would like to highlight the importance of the strong public participation and strong organized communities that they can handle in the difficult times more effectively. So I think that's my 5 minutes, and happy to discuss more, and we'd like to hear also from participants.
Hi. So now we would like to open the panel. We've had 5 really comprehensive and timely presentations about a range of issues that are faced in the Mekong region, especially by marginalized groups. We've also heard about some of the more positive responses, ranging from local food production to solidarity across groups. So we can open, again, this format is not quite the same as being in the room together, but I think that you can put your virtual hand up and then contribute, ask a question to the panel, or add a comment. Given that there's a relatively large number of people and a limited amount of time, please could you briefly introduce yourself and keep your comment or question as brief as possible, but say what you want to say. And if it's addressed to a particular speaker, then please mention that as well. Are there any questions or comments for the panel?
Hi, Pai. It's very glad to see you.
Hi, Wang Yongchen.
Yeah, I want to ask you, what about dam issues in Thailand now? I can tell you, No River now is much better than when we first time to be there. Now it's a national park. So in the new road is built. But the local people don't want to, like in future, government give them some answer. It's a beautiful road, but what is a beautiful life? So we are worried about Thailand, the dam issues. I know you still mention about this. In the China company, is still work there?
Yeah, for the situation of the dams, if you look at this map, on the Salaween is still free flowing, and as I mentioned, that the health of the river and health of the forest and wetlands are still very, very healthy. So that keep food security for the people in the Salaween Basin. But looking at the sister, the Mekong River, already 11 dams built on the upper reaches in Yunnan. Then 2 dams already built in the lower basin in Laos, Sayaburi and Don Sahong Dam on Lao-Cambodia border. So I would say that that's already caused huge and drastic ecological destruction in the lower basin, but still there are more plans to build dam on the Mekong River in the lower basin. So as Ajahn Kanokwan already mentioned, I think we'll hear more from her, is that the decline of fish, and these are the regional transboundary issues that still need better management of these shared resources.
Okay,
Okay.
I have a very short response to the ladies in terms of access to infrastructure. Of course, Thailand is very successful. Everyone get electricity, but in terms of livelihoods, the livelihoods related to environments or resources, it's getting worse because the resources that once abundant now is very scarcity, and also it's very hard for people to get access to natural resources that can sustain their life. So it's put together with COVID, the situation is getting worse.
I have a question that actually links to the discussion that we've just had for Nwet Khine. So Pai mentioned about the Salween River, which it flows largely through ethnic areas in Myanmar, in Burma. And I wanted to ask, what has been the impact of the COVID pandemic in the ethnic areas of Burma? I don't see very much discussion on this topic, and I wonder if you have any further information on this.
Yeah, that's true. I think we still have this ongoing civil war, especially in the ethnic area. So for the IDP camps in Kachin and Northern Shan, and also Karen states, including some parts of Tenen Sari divisions in the south, and also western border with India. These contested area are, the most difficult part to assess for the COVID-19 responses. For example, the people from IDP camps have less access to the medical service and also the information which is fundamental to the protection of the COVID-19, and also like the health equipment such as PPE and masks, and these are the transportation is quite difficult to the war zone. Apart from that, there now is the election time. So election is coming in November, and so the space for the civil society in ethnic area is under somehow like shrinking because of the the reminder keep coming from the election commission that you cannot gather more than 5 people, and that so the space for the civil movement is quite small, because to counteract the needs of the COVID. I mean the COVID, especially in the context of COVID. This is such a unfavorable coincidence for us.
Great, thank you, Nwet Khine. There's a question from Ajahn Apichai.
I mean, it's a general question because it's something relevant to the topic we're discussing. But this is a sort of a track 1.5 or track 2 event, which just took place 2 days ago in, well, it was organized by the Vietnamese Foreign Ministry, because as you know, they are chairing ASEAN this year. And earlier this year, they had floated the idea of whether the ASEAN could consider the Mekong sort of, agenda under its wings too, all right? And so they actually convened what is called, and I quote, an ASEAN Forum on Sub-Regional Development, converging Mekong sub-regional development with the ASEAN agenda or ASEAN goals. I wasn't able to, participate in this, but there were many other representatives from the region, from think tanks and so forth, and from the various international development agencies and various donor countries. They took part in this event, which was held 2 days ago for half in the morning. Basically, the 3 sessions that they did conduct on one was on the economic corridors, so building blocks for ASEAN regional connectivity. And the other one is on sustainable development, challenges and solutions. And then finally, the last session was enhancing ASEAN's role in sub-regional development. And of course, the focus was on the Mekong, all right? Now, I don't know whether any of the panelists have any reaction to this move on the part of Vietnam as part of its ASEAN chairmanship to float this kind of thing. I suspect that Vietnam would probably table something on this to the next foreign ministers meeting, which is supposed to be scheduled later this year. All right, so maybe any comments from the panelists or reaction?
Are there any panelists that would like to address this question about Vietnam and the role of ASEAN in sustainability in the region?
Well, I think that this idea about connectivity has been, floating around for some time. And, the whole idea of integration has contained this idea of both infrastructure connectivity, as well as industrial connectivity in the form of complementary special economic zones. So connectivity over the last 5 years at least has been the watchword, both in terms of Chinese rhetoric as well as ASEAN rhetoric. So it's like, it's become some sort of a mantra that has lost a lot of real substance in terms of supporting people's interests. Now, if you read, for instance, documents related to Myanmar's development that were, were turned out over the last several years, beginning with the 2011 government, connectivity is always almost in all of these documents. And I think the point that they really, I think what's happening is they would really want to a form of integration, that reduces the self-sufficiency of the different regions, and it's connected to export. The emphasis on export-oriented growth, and the way that ASEAN, for instance, as a region, has now become pretty much part of the Sinocentric division of labor. Okay, that really is built around China. And we've seen the destructive effects of connectivity during the COVID-19, because, for instance, in the last, the last few years, globalization was given a new breath by China in terms of the rhetoric of connectivity, especially air connectivity. And as we saw, what we saw with COVID-19 was that more intensified air travel, in fact, became a source of the rapid spread of the infection. And we've also seen how connectivity in terms of global and regional supply chains it became a big problem when in the early months of COVID-19, the industries in China began to stop. We saw that, this had a major impact throughout the world, and not only through ASEAN, in terms of supplies and imports and exports. And we saw also that impact when we talk about the global, the food supply chains being disrupted. So I think, to be honest, I think that this idea of connectivity is really very much undermining the ability of countries within ASEAN to have a more, independent kind of development away from the sort of globalized connectivity that has been promoted by the multilateral agencies. And hopefully, one of the things that could happen because of COVID-19, with the closing of borders and all of this, people could rethink what development really means. And that should be a development that really serves local communities and not suck up the resources from them and promotes a kind of destructive integration that has been the kind of development that ASEAN has been experiencing over the last 3 decades.
Thank you, Walden. I think, so Clarissa had asked a question via the chat. I think that you've just addressed it, but Clarissa, if it's not addressed, then please let us know. Are there any other panelists that want to respond to this particular question? I know that I'm chair, but I'd actually just like to add a very brief intervention on this. And that is that I think there's also a geopolitical dimension to regional connectivity as well. So regional connectivity might imply that everything is connecting to each other, but especially in the context of the intensifying geopolitical conflict between China and the US, I think different visions of regionalization are connecting different countries together. And so in other words, the regionalization that's being expressed is also a geopolitical expression of which configuration of connectivity serves different greater powers better. Okay, so unless any of the other panelists want to address this point, there's another question from Phil Hirsch, which is to Ajahn Naruemon. Phil, do you want to unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Well, thanks to all the panelists. Really excellent presentations. I've actually got two questions, one for Ajahn Naruemon and one for Walden, but they're quite different questions. So maybe I'll ask one at a time, and I don't want to take up other people's time. So maybe I could ask Ajahn Naruemon if it's time. I'll ask Walden later. So Ajahn Naruemon, thanks for the presentation on a really important and I think much neglected topic, the situation of migrant workers in Thailand during the COVID period. There's still a kind of puzzle in my mind anyway, from what we hear and even following your really interesting presentation, which is why the 2-point-something million migrant workers living in Thailand in very crowded conditions for the most part, and now often without jobs or with reduced work, why they have not faced the situation that migrant workers in Singapore have faced, where we've seen this big outbreak. Or could it be possible that there is an outbreak, and for the reasons that you've already told us, people are simply not being tested? But if that's the case, then the other puzzle is, why is this not spread to the wider community? I wonder whether you could not necessarily answer those questions definitively, because I'm sure there's still a lot of open questions that need to be answered and need more research. But just give us an idea of the sort of state of knowledge of whether, in fact, that sort of COVID outbreak among migrant workers living in dormitories and camps has been avoided, or if not, how is it that it seems to have been kept under the radar?
Thank you, Phil, for the question. I think Thailand, the Ministry of Public Health in Thailand they use the OSOTO. It's called Migrant Health Volunteer. I think the reason that Thailand can control the positive case of the COVID-19 because from the Thai, in the Thai context, in the case of Thai, the health volunteer also doing in every area. And when they worry about the situation of the migrant, they hire the migrant worker who doesn't have job to be the migrant health volunteer. So basically this migrant health volunteer doing the screen check. So they have the application. I mean, in the application, I think Carl might know in Chulalongkorn, you will have application that in the last 14 days where you have been, where do you do, something like that. And even that the Thai Chana, the application, it doesn't mind for the nationality. As long as you download, you use Live, you do the same thing. The only concern for us with the migrant worker is the payment. If they get infected, who will pay for them? At the moment, I think for the pre-screening in terms of the pre-test for the check, they do it with the process, with the migrant health volunteer. And then after that, if they have a case, so they send this migrant health volunteer to they call the migrant worker trust fund. Basically, when migrant worker come here, they have to pay 3,000 baht as the health insurance. So at the moment, the health insurance will pay for them. The problem that we concern is that you have to be affected first. If you are not infected, you are not paid. So basically, it will be no free test. Basically, if you get sick, you will get treatment, or if they are considered, if the health volunteer feel that you get sick, they will put you in that process. So that's why they keep the number low. I think for them, they're quite, very efficient in terms of the public, the hospital, even at the district level, they do that in everywhere. So in that case, that's a kind of the process. The reason that they are different for Singapore, another one is that in Singapore, people stay together in the dormitory. But in case of the migrant worker, the sector that we are worried is the construction. because they are crowded and we cannot trace. But those who work in the factory have the dormitory that separately. And they're really worried because Australia, EU saying that if we get any infected, we will not import your product. So they do the every process. They even ask, meaning the Chulalongkorn to do the test for them, and they will pay, they will provide the quarantine if it's happened. So I think in terms of the business and civil society, for me, the positive side is that we can see for the first time that the employer and employee work together with CSO in that way, because they are worried in terms of the, unable to, produce the product. So they would like to keep this goal. Another reason is that for Singapore provides something like 100 or 10,000 or 20,000 per day with the free test. So Singapore can detect more. For Thailand doesn't have enough, test kit in order to do that. You have to go to the hospital. So they do some kind like a family doctor with the health staff to do pre-screen. But I think it's also okay. I think the problem that we are facing right now is in the police lockup or in the detention, or those who are, to the border. And this is that why the Thai, many people still worry whether they should reopen the border or not. Another issue I think that related in terms of number is the decentralization. Even though they put the state emergency decree, they allow the province to handle. So in that case, it's not really, especially in terms of health, it's not really concentrated. In the center in Bangkok, so in its province with the hospital that become more, able to organize. And I think in that case, that might be some kind of the collaboration, but it's not yet formal or institutionalized. So the Thai government should support this kind of project, allow the health volunteer, the migrant, to be paid, not for free. At the moment, it's still for free.
Great, thank you, Ajahn. Do any other panelists want to respond to this? Are there other questions amongst the participants? We still have one question from Phil. Are there any others that haven't spoken yet that would like to ask?
Abhijay again. In what the point that Phil raised, the Economist this week's or the July 11th edition had an interesting article in the Banyan section, which is basically Southeast Asia, with the title of "Why Has the Pandemic Spared the Buddhist Parts of Southeast Asia?" with a subcaption of Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam have only tiny outbreaks. Okay, as we all know, the archipelagic or the parts of Southeast Asia, namely like Indonesia, Philippines, or even Singapore, are quite badly affected. And I think this article is trying to, well, it raises the points, although it doesn't really give any solid answers of what could be the rationale behind. I think Ajahn Naruemon was trying to also respond to that. But I think it's an interesting question. And I think maybe development specialists or even say sociologists or anthropologists should try to dig a little bit deeper as to what exactly is happening. Is there something very unique within mainland Southeast Asia, or let's say the Mekong countries, which somehow escaped the first COVID, invasion, shall we say? But then whether any recurrent invasions of COVID, if there is any, would they be able to still sustain their resistance or their resilience or whatever? It'd be interesting to hear any views or comments from panelists on this.
Thank you. So I think this is a challenge for Ajahn Naruemon's future research role. If there's no other questions, we'll go back to Phil for the second question to Walden. If there's time, I might also add another question to Ajahn Kanokwan, but let's see on the time.
Okay, thanks. I fear it's a rather big question, Walden. I like your presentation very much on the critique of the international food system and agree with a lot of what you said. But I guess just to provoke a bit, you raised a country from one country, from Myanmar. We heard another very good presentation from Myanmar. Myanmar is a country which over the last, I guess you could say during the development era, is a country which is often associated as one country which actively tried to withdraw itself. They went through a period of about 3 decades of autarky, having been one of the major suppliers of food on the global stage during colonial times, with all the upheavals that created. It then sort of reversed. So I guess my question is, if we are to see a move of sort of disengaging, delinking, more localization, more, if you like, kind of autarky and improved production, what are the lessons to avoid from Myanmar's earlier phase of autarky, which I assume that you would agree was not a great model to follow in terms of providing good food outcomes for the population?
I think what we had during, this is my opinion, after looking at the historical development over the last several decades in Myanmar, what we really had during, the military regime, yes, there was autarky, but it was, a very coercive form of surplus extraction, okay? In which you really had, this military caste elite, that was, engaged in, very, heavy exploitation of both peasants as well as, the small working class and, and rural workers. And so, I think that one lesson, if we're going to have more experiences of, localized production and more efforts at what we might call food sovereignty, is I think it's very necessary for that process to be accompanied by real democratization, in which you really have decentralized power, and communities and regions, really interacting in that in a democratic fashion. We did try to, working with Paung, who we tried to provide some sort of a template for that kind of democratic but decentralized production to take place. So just very briefly then, I would say, Phil, that the one thing we really need to avoid is another kind of centralized autarky. That would be a disaster. It would just bring back the same kind of disaster in the past. So democracy is the key.
Thank you, Walden. Nwet, Khine, do you want to add anything to this question?
Yeah, and I also love the questions. Recently, MIDDA has been focusing on to introduce food sovereignty concept, to the journalists and to the civil society sectors. But for us, when we talk about food sovereignty, the people, the people are reminded about, our failure of the socialist systems, and they usually ask questions, why we are talking about delinking. We are not even fully integrated into the food system yet. So, like, I would say 90% of the NGOs and also medias and civic, the people around us don't really understand the food sovereignty yet. But I think for us is, we are looking for the alternatives, how we can balance, this neoliberal paradigm, because it is that the forces of the companies are so powerful. Now, since the government started the seed registration scheme, now within a few months, now there are like 280 seeds company. So the scheme of the government is to phase out all the pharma seed system, because they thought that the farmers are not really capable to maintain the quality of the seed, and also they are not capable to go into the international market. So what the government trying to do is, to replace, the rights of the farm, to give the rights of the farmers to the company. So that's what we're done is talking about, another concentration of power. So we are looking for the ways, how we can avoid, the same scenarios we have seen in colonial days. Thank you for asking these questions.
Thanks, Khine. I don't see any other hands up. If there's not, I will ask a question. But if there are others that would like to ask a question, I don't think there is. Okay, so my question follows on very directly from the question, that's the way the question evolved from Phil to Walden with Khine's response as well. And it echoes a question that Ajahn Chantana has just asked about what's happening to alternative practices around the region and how have they been affected by COVID. So I would like to ask in particular to Ajahn Kanokwan, like you painted the picture of a lot of harm that has been created by modernization projects in Northeast Thailand. But I think also there are some really interesting initiatives, local-led initiatives for imagining different forms of local development or like local communities. And I wonder if you could share a little bit on this. I know that you also research on post-development and political ecology in Northeast Thailand. And I think you would come across some interesting examples of some alternative good things that are happening.
Mm-hmm. So I would like to say from my field research on 2 projects. The first one, like social impact assessment in La Sisarai Dam that I'm currently working on. The second one on precision or poverty alleviation project in Amna Chalerm. So I have found some interesting response made by local people in order to survive daily. So the first one, they're trying to save the money. It's very practical. They're trying to save the money by prioritizing what is really the most important expense they would like to spend on because they have limited income. And the second one, there are groups of people trying to do organic agriculture. Even though they have been doing this for a long time, but they know for food security, they would like to save money, not to buy inputs. They would like to use very organic stuff in order to like home gardens more prominence in the area. And the third one, they try to increase fish productivity by having more like fish sanctuary in the area, in the river. And I think the third one, it's a kind of social what do you call? Social capital. They use social capital a lot in order to support each other. They use a network they have. They also ask the government to support them, particularly the very, very poor people. They don't have enough money, so they just go to the government directly and say, hey, I need some help. And because of social network, social capital is quite important in the area. The kinship system is working more compared to the past, because a lot of people return home, they lay off because of layoff from Bangkok, so they return home. So once they return home, the kids, the people, the families, or the siblings trying to help each other. So I have seen this as a example, that very concrete example. So social capital is very important in Isan, and also is nowadays more important. So I think this issue could be able to highlight how the people in Isan survive during COVID period.
Thank you very much, Ajahn. I think we probably have to wrap up. But I did, if I could be permitted 1 minute, just to ask Pai. Pai, is there anything that you want to add about local initiatives and local different, like alternative visions for the region from your work, very much working with social movements on the ground?
Yeah, but what I've been seeing during the COVID is that, yeah, it's the more organized community are, the more effective they can handle with problems, particularly during this time, this difficult time. Yeah, the way they collect money to buy concrete to make the road to improve the road to the town during the rainy season, and limited government support in the Salaween Basin in Myeongson, for example. Yeah, and also more better organized fisher folks in Chiang Khong on the Mekong River, that they still share the income that they still gain from the fishing in the Mekong River, to build small like community trust, so that they can provide support for the fisher folks in the same fishing ground, for example. Also the wetlands protection network in the Ingwa Basin. So this kind of thing, I think that the more people are organized, the more people are informed and concerned about public issues. So that's the way to prepare people to cope with difficult COVID-19 or anything that would happen to them, to the communities.
Thanks, Pai. We're almost out of time, I think. Lu Jing, Professor Lu Jing from Yunnan has raised his hand. So I think if we give one last intervention from Lu Jing, and then we will wrap up.
Okay, thank you, Carl. I just want to get a little information from Kanokwan and Khine from Myanmar. Recently, we heard that in Laos, a lot of small business and the farmers, they are run out of the cash. This is what the situation in Thailand and in Myanmar. Let's get information. Thank you.
Maybe I can summarize the question, and if I get it wrong, Lu Jing, you can correct me. I think the question was reflecting on in northern Laos, farmers are running out of cash, and it's affecting them seriously. And Lu Jing was asking if there's a similar situation in northeast Thailand and in Burma at the moment.
Okay, so they don't have serious problem on this, because they have the village scheme, a funding scheme. So it's a kind of you know, during Thaksin they have like 1 million baht scheme, and also they have other welfare schemes. They have like saving community saving schemes. So they're not running out of cash, but since they have less income, so they get more debt because they borrow more than they can invest, they can earn. So that's a big problem now. More people get more debt, but they couldn't find money to return to the scheme yet. Maybe it takes longer time before the COVID's gone. So they top up the debt. That's the situation in the Northeast.
Thanks, Ajahn. Kane, you'll have the final comment of the session.
Thank you. Our problem is the same. I think beyond, you know, we run out of money already. So indebtedness is our main problem. I mean, the farmers has been facing, you know, the debt problems for decades, and the COVID wave exacerbate, you know, the situations of the financial capital of farmers. But another new findings of my friends, you know, who are conducting research with the microfinance, like in colonial days, we have chitia, you know, oversupply of chitia leads to the landlords among the farmers. Now we are repeating the same kind of patterns, because recently all the microfinance company, you know, including the biggest player in the world, came to Myanmar. And so, you know, every village has, you know, access to more than like 5 companies, you know, coming to the village and, you know, keep lending money. And sometimes the people are forced to borrow the money. So of course, you know, these groups are including farmers. And so now, you know, to pay the debt, you know, they are taking the money from the other informal sectors with higher interest rates. So the vicious cycle is, you know, now happening. So this situation should be tackled, you know, with the immediate attention from the government. That is the response from the civil society and the people, I mean, from the research sites, you know, our findings are not so positive about from the farmer side. This is kind of dangerous situation now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kane. So I think we're going to have to wrap up the panel now. I mean, it was a very ambitious topic to cover the pandemic, economic downturn, and climate crisis in one panel, but I think the panelists have done a comprehensive job. And there's also been some really important discussion that's been had. I'm not going to try and summarize it, because I think that there's too much. Rather, I'd just like to say, on behalf of all the participants, to thank our panelists, Walden, Naruemon, Kanokwan, Khine, Supawadee, and Pianporn, for spending the time to prepare and join the panel. And I think on behalf of everyone here, seeing that we're in a virtual room, I will applaud you. And
virtual clapping.
And I think we'll wrap it up there. I'm not sure if the host would like to also add something. Okay, Margaret.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. Thank you very much. I will make an announcement because will organize the last workshop on the sections on Venezuela, how the Venezuela communities confront the triple trap. And one of their difficulties, actually, they are facing the US sanctions. So this is quite different from the other areas. As you know, China, Iran, and Venezuela also face this very serious problem nowadays. So we welcome you, and then we will provide the interpretation from Spanish to English, and also we provide the from English to Chinese. Thank you very much. You are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.